Hi, it's Nicole. Today let's talk about A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. And I'd like to discuss with you one question specifically. What was Charles Dickens' attitude towards the French Revolution? A Tale of Two Cities is my second Charles Dickens. I read Great Expectations last year. I didn't love it, so I didn't have a very high expectation for this one. Plus, the ending was already spoiled for me by a sermon illustration a while ago. But I was completely blown away. It's incredibly moving, definitely one of my favorites of the year. So this is a historical fiction written in the Victorian era about the French Revolution, which happened about 70 years before Charles Dickens started to write about it. So in comparison, it would be something like us writing about the Second World War. That's about the time distance in between. I'll give you a brief summary and try not to spoil it for you. This was set, as I said, in the time period just before and during the French Revolution in two cities, London and Paris. Lucy Manette grew up as an orphan until she was about 20 years old. She got a message from her family bank, Tellson's Bank, about her father, who died a long time ago. And she met up with a gentleman from the bank, Mr. Lorry, in Dover. And Mr. Lorry told her that her father actually did not die, but was secretly put into prison for 18 years in Bastille. Now he was released. They were going to Paris to pick him up and bring him home to London. Mr. Lorry became a family friend, and Lucy and Miss Pross, her governess, looked after Dr. Manette and nursed him back to life. They lived peacefully together for 5 years. A court case in the Old Bailey, that's the criminal court in London, introduces two key characters, Charles Darnay, on trial as a spy and was declared innocent because of the second person, Sidney Carton, a barrister. They both fell in love with Lucy and Lucy married Darnay. When their daughter was 6-year-old, Mr. Lorry volunteered to look after the bank's business in Paris, even though the situation in France was getting dangerous and stormy. Darnay also went to Paris because of a letter. An old servant was imprisoned because he was a servant of a marquis. I will just make a note at this point. Marquis is the French pronunciation, I think. I will follow that because that's how Simon Carlo pronounced it in the audiobook. I think in UK English, it's Marquis, it's a nobleman. So this servant was imprisoned because he was a servant of a marquis, an aristocrat, and this marquis was assassinated, and this marquis was the uncle of Charles Darnay. So now Charles Darnay is the heir to this title and the land and aristocrat. So as soon as Darnay got to Paris, he was arrested and put into prison. The rest of the story was about everybody's effort to get Darnay out of the prison while living in the eye of the hurricane. At this point, I just want to make a disclaimer. The French Revolution was a real historical event, which I know very little about. I'm only looking at it through the very narrow lens of one novel by one author. My understanding is limited. I'm sure Dickens' understanding was limited as well. No one is all-knowing. But having said that, I don't want to hurt people's feeling. I'm just analysing the novel itself. If you know any good books, any book recommendations that I can read on this topic for more, leave me a comment. I'd love to know. While I was reading, one question kept coming back to me. What was Dickens' attitudes towards the French Revolution, the people and aristocrats? I kept wondering whose side was Dickens on. Dickens was famous for writing about working class people, people in poverty, their life and their hardship. So I assumed Dickens was for the people against the aristocrats. In the first half of the novel, Dickens laid out case after case condemning the corrupt lifestyle of the aristocrats, how they treated people worse than animals, how they were completely indifferent to people's life. I'll give you a few examples. In one of the beginning chapters, we were introduced to a great lord, the Monsignor. We saw his completely corrupt and luxurious lifestyle, needing 4 servants just to get him a cup of hot chocolate. We saw another nobleman, the Marquis. His carriage sped through crowded streets and killed a child on the spot. He didn't even get off his carriage and wouldn't have dreamed of apologizing. He just tossed a coin out of his carriage window and drove away with the air of a gentleman who had accidentally broke some common thing and had paid for it and could afford to pay for it. There was the direct description of a village in utter poverty. The village had its one poor street, with its poor brewery, poor tannery, poor tavern, poor stable yard for relays of post horses, poor fountain, all usual poor appointments. It had its poor people too. All its people were poor, and many of them were sitting at their doors, shredding spare onions and the like for supper, while many were at the fountain, washing leaves and grasses and any such small yieldings of the earth that could be eaten. Expressive signs of what made them poor were not wanting. The tax for the state, the tax for the church, the tax for the lord, tax local and tax general were to be paid here and to be paid there, according to solemn inscription in the little village, until the wonder was that there was any village left unswallowed. When the same Marquis drove through the village, a young widow knelt for a petition. Please can my husband have a stone to mark his grave? He was buried under a heap of poor grass. But there are so many heaps of poor grass. How can people find his and bury me next to him when it's my turn to die of hunger? There was a desperate person who committed a crime and was marched to his death. His arms are swelled because of being bound so tight. His wooden shoes are large and clumsy, and he is lame. Because he is lame and consequently slow, they drive him with their guns like this. He imitated the action of a man's being impelled forward by the butt ends of muskets. As they descend the hill like madmen running a race, he falls. They laugh and pick him up again. His face is bleeding and covered with dust, but he cannot touch it. Thereupon they laugh again. It's heartbreaking to read. Dickens condemned the corruption and ugliness of the aristocrats and showed open and strong sympathy for the poor, and we 100% sympathize with the poor as well. Among the French poor, Dickens singled out Monsieur and Madame Defarge. We like them because they quietly took Dr. Manette in when he was released from the prison, and they helped them to leave France, and they waited patiently and persevered intelligently for the time to ripe. Then there was a shift. We saw the first instance of Madame Defarge committing a violence. She put her foot upon his neck, this is the governor of Bastille, and with her cruel knife, long ready, hewed off his head. It was so fast and chaotic, it took me a while to realize, whoa, this is the storming of the Bastille. This was a whirlpool of boiling waters, headlong, mad and dangerous crowd. A powerful, angry and bloodthirsty mob started to emerge. I give you one frightening scene of lynching and mob violence. The angry mob captured one particularly hateful politician, Joseph Foulon, down and up, and head foremost on the steps of the building, now on his knees, now on his feet, now on his back, dragged and struck at, and stifled by the bunches of grass and straw that were thrust into his face by hundreds of hands, torn, bruised, panting, bleeding, yet always entreating and beseeching for mercy, now full of vehement agony of action, with a small clear space about him as the people drew one another back that they might see. Now, a log of dead wood drawn through a forest of legs. He was hauled to the nearest street corner where one of the fatal lamps swung, and there Madame Defarge let him go, as a cat might have done to a mouse, and silently and composedly looked at him while they made ready, and while he bethought her. The women passionately screeching at him all the time, and the men sternly calling out to have him killed with grass in his mouth. Once he went aloft, and the rope broke, and they caught him shrieking. Twice he went aloft, and the rope broke, and they caught him shrieking. Then the rope was merciful, and held him, and his head was soon upon a pike, with grass enough in the mouth for all Saint-Antoine to dance at the sight of. The mob also killed his son-in-law later that day, set his head and heart on pikes, and carried the 3 spoils of the day in wolf procession through the streets. This was a real historical event. Dickens hardly needed to dramatize it. It was so shocking to see the submissive villagers just from a few chapters ago so quickly turned into bloodthirsty monsters and beasts. But I still felt sorry for them. They've been oppressed for so long. They wanted justice, and they were punishing their enemies who told their starving families to eat grass. The deciding sin for me that Dickens was not on the side of the people was when we saw through Darnay's eyes the coarseness of the patriots and the jailers against the beauty and gracefulness of the aristocrats in prison. When Darnay was arrested, he was taken into a room smelling of common wine and tobacco, where certain soldiers and patriots, asleep and awake, drunk and sober, and in various neutral states between sleeping and waking, drunkenness and severity, were standing and lying about. On the way to his prison cell, they came into a large, low, vaulted chamber, crowded with prisoners of both sexes. The women were seated on a long table, reading and writing, knitting, sewing, and embroidering. The men were for the most part standing behind their chairs or lingering up and down the room. In the instinctive association of prisoners with shameful crime and disgrace, the newcomer recoiled from this company. But the crowning unreality of his long unreal ride was their all at once rising to receive him, with every refinement of manner known to the time, and with all the engaging graces and courtesies of life. So strangely clouded were these refinements by the prison manners and gloom, so spectral did they become in the inappropriate squalor and misery through which they were seen, that Charles Darnay seemed to stand in the company of the dead. Ghosts all. The ghost of beauty, the ghost of stateliness, the ghost of elegance, the ghost of pride, the ghost of frivolity, the ghost of wit, the ghost of youth, the ghost of age, all waiting their dismissal from the desolate shore, all turning on him eyes that were changed by the death they had died in coming there. In the name of the assembled companions in misfortune, said a gentleman of courtly appearance and address, coming forward, I have the honour of giving you welcome to La Force, and of condoling with you on the calamity that has brought you among us. May it soon terminate happily. There was a murmur of commiseration as Charles Darnay crossed the room to a grated door where the jailer awaited him, and many voices, among which the soft and compassionate voices of women were conspicuous, gave him good wishes and encouragement. He turned at the grated door to render the thanks of his heart. It closed under the jailer's hand, and the apparitions vanished from his sight forever. Dickens lamented the destruction of the beauty and orderliness, especially contrasted with the ugliness and coarseness of the mob. They were lost and dead, vanished forever. Young daughters, old mothers, wives, for no crime except that was what they were born into. They treated Darnay with care and compassion despite their own circumstances. These prisoners have now become the vulnerable and helpless. Their life and death now depended on the drunken words and the half-awake brains, and on the mood of the mob who put heads on pikes. Dickens describes one of the patriotic jury as a life-thirsting, cannibal-looking, bloody-minded juryman, the Jacques III of Saint-Antoine, the whole jury as a jury of dogs impaneled to try the deer. I felt utterly sorry for the aristocrats waiting calmly in the dungeons for the sharp female newly born and called La Guillotine. One more thing shocking to see was people's complete indifference to human life, making the guillotine a show, an entertainment, a sport. Go and see him. This refers to the executioner called Samson. Go Go and see him when he has a good batch. Figure this to yourself, citizen. He shaved the 63 today in less than 2 pipes. Less than 2 pipes. Word of honor. Meaning they executed 63 prisoners in a period of time that was shorter than it took this spectator to smoke his 2 pipes. At the last post, how many to the guillotine today? 52. I said so. A brave number. My fellow citizen here would have it 42. 10 more heads are worth having. The guillotine goes handsomely. I love it. The ministers of St. Guillotine are robed and ready. Crash. A head is held up, and the kneeling women, who scarcely lifted their eyes to look at it a moment ago, when it could think and speak, count 1. The second tumbril empties and moves on. The third comes up. Crash. And the kneeling women, never faltering or pausing in their work, count 2. So just as I thought Dickens was firmly on the side of the aristocrats, we heard the story of Dr. Manette, emphasizing the corruption of the rich and the oppression of the poor. As Darnay said to his uncle, the Marquis, we have done wrong and are reaping the fruits of wrong. After seeing all this, I hope you agree that Dickens was not on either side. He fairly presented the case of both sides. The aristocrats were wrong. They only cared about themselves. They oppressed the people, and there was no justice and no respect for human life. But there was beauty and goodness in polite society. There was music, there was literature, medicine, and technology. And the aristocrats are not one person, and they should not be generalized and stereotyped. For example, Darnay didn't want his wealth and his title, and he could see that it was wrong. And his mother, who tried to correct the injustice done. The people were presented as utterly poor, oppressed, and helpless, but as soon as the tide was turned, they were equally capable of murder without distinction, brutality, madness, and hatred. There was no justice and no respect for human life either. The prison gorged with people who had committed no offense and could obtain no hearing. Yes, the Marquis ran over a child as if it was just a rat, but Madame Defarge and the patriotic jury didn't care. Darnay renounced his wealth and his title and moved to England altogether. They wanted the Evermont people to be exterminated. Lucy's blue eyes and gold hair would look charming when Sum held them up. And the child also has golden hair and blue eyes, and we seldom have a child there. It is a pretty sight. There was a seamstress of 20 whose poverty and obscurity could not save her. Her case is particularly telling that the revolution has gone wrong. Before she bowed her head under the guillotine. "Citizen Evermont," she said, touching him with her cold hand, "I am a poor little seamstress who was with you in La Force." He murmured for answer, "True, I forget what you were accused of." "Plots. Though the just heaven knows that I am innocent of any. Is it likely? Who would think of plotting with a poor little weak creature like me?" The forlorn smile with which she said it so touched him that tears started from his eyes. "I am not afraid to die, Citizen Evermont, but I have done nothing. I am not unwilling to die if the Republic, which is to do so much good to us poor, will profit by my death. But I do not know how that can be, Citizen Evermont, such a poor, weak little creature." Her question was an accusation. Her life, and no doubt many, were sacrificed on the altar of the dawning Republic, one and indivisible, of liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. Dickens presented both sides in good and bad light. What was his point? Can society become better through revolutions? I believe Dickens' point was that better life and society do not come from violence and bloodshed, but love. How do I come to that conclusion? To be able to explain myself, I need to show you one of my favorite scenes towards the end of the novel. It was the standoff between Miss Pross and Madame Defarge. It was a life and death situation. It was extremely intense, but Dickens managed to make it funny. He was such a master writer, making me cry and laugh in one breath. By this point, Madame Defarge has been established as the head of the Patriots, the most bloodthirsty, merciless woman. She was the personification of hatred and revenge. She came with a knife and a pistol to arrest them all. She wanted to send the whole family to the prison and to the guillotine. Miss Pross, the loyal, faithful protector and friend, she was, at this point, the personification of love. She wanted to detain Madame Defarge for as long as possible to gain time for her mistress and the family, despite the danger to herself. She had no weapon, she only had her arms and legs. And there was a struggle. This was the only struggle between two equal sides. By which I mean there were a lot of physical violence in the book, but they were never on equal footing. For example, when the Marquis killed the child, the people there didn't even protest, they didn't look up because of fear. And when the aristocrats were dragged into the streets, stabbed to death, they could not defend themselves. Except in this scene, this was an equal struggle, face to face. But note, the struggle was not the rich against the poor. Miss Pross was definitely not one of the rich. She was not an aristocrat, she was just a governess. And Dickens gave us a clue in the middle of this struggle. He said, "The vigorous tenacity of love, always so much stronger than hate." This was a struggle between love and hate. The family was delivered through friendship, self-sacrifice, and love. Love triumphs hate and will win out at the end of the day. Yes, with great cost. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. A few more things before we wrap up. I listened to the audiobook narrated by Simon Carlo. It was incredible. Excellent. I highly recommend. And I read also alongside this edition you saw earlier already, and this one has the original illustration in them. I believe these are the illustrations that came out with the original serialization when it was first published. And this front cover design, as you can tell, these are Madame Defarge knitings, but I think also they represent the guillotines. If you see the sharp edge at the bottom of each piece of knitting, I believe they are the guillotines. I think that's very clever. A big thank you to Katie from Books and Things for recommending this one as part of the historical fiction readathon. I absolutely loved it. If I only managed to read one book this month, and this is the one, it would have been enough. I would have been satisfied. While I was preparing for this video, during the process, I managed to persuade my husband to read it. I really hope you will pick it up as well. Just persevere through the first 3 chapters and it becomes a thriller. If you watch to the end of my video and decide to pick this novel up, please leave me a comment. I'll be so happy. There will be one more person in this world who reads A Tale of Two Cities. Let me know what you think, if you read it already, if you didn't like it, or if you did like it, what do you think about this one compared to many other Dickens novels? Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.